Fund. And what that is they provide money for vet students coming into Green River who maybe can't afford tuition, need help with textbooks and so on. So all the money from this will benefit that.
So it's a great event for a great cause. We're so excited.
Good afternoon, everyone. Welcome to the Kent City Council Committee of the Whole meeting. Today is Tuesday, July 27th, 2021. We are all here in person again this afternoon, but welcome to anyone that is joining us on Facebook, City of Kent page, on the YouTube, Kent TV 21, and anyone that is calling in to listen. We will go ahead and get started with our agenda with the roll call. Kim, please call the roll.
Thank you, Council President. Council President Troutner.
Here.
Councilmember Boyce.
Yeah.
Councilmember Fincher.
Here.
Councilmember Kaur. Councilmember Larmer.
Here.
Councilmember Michaud.
Here.
Councilmember Thomas.
Here.
Thank you.
All right, wonderful. Thank you, Kim. Moving on to committee business. The first item we have is payment of bills. That comes to the council members in email, so we will go ahead and move that to the consent calendar and then move on to our first topic, which is community partnerships.
Good afternoon, everyone. My name is Tsai-En. I'm from Green River College. I'm the Dean of Branch Campuses Academic and Program Development. It's harder to understand what I do, but I oversee our 3 branch campuses, Small Business Center, Continuing Education, Water, Wastewater, so Washington Environmental Training Center. I also work with community partners to look at, how do we fulfill the educational institution's goal and community development and to create holistic workforce. That's our goal. And so today I'm going to present you some of the things that we have been doing in the community, especially for Kent. Let's see here. Where do I aim?
I can go ahead and advance if you want to.
So when COVID hits, things get tricky, right? So when COVID hit back in March, our campus closed down. By May 28th, we already host the first international webinars where a lot of mayors from different cities attend, a lot of council members attend from City of Seattle and Kent and Enumclaw, Auburn. We have hosted that international webinars to have people from Taiwan share their best practices at that time. We also then continue to provide our one-on-one counselings and mentorship for local businesses, focusing on how to keep your momentum going, how do you keep coping with COVID while going through all the challenges. We also have launched our COVID resource website that focused on all the resources that through different fundings and videos, webinars that we are hosting. And next. So on the COVID relief webinars, Green River College received the CARES Act fundings from Small Business Center. So those are just some of the topics that we have. Continuing that we also have topics related to if you want to move on to a different business, what would you do? Because maybe after pandemic, you reassess your business and this might not be the best model for you anymore. How do you transition to others? We also start noticing a lot of entrepreneurs show up, through this pandemic, that even though there is layoff, there is some silver linings here. So next. For community collaborations, I joined Green River 2 years ago. Before I joined Green River, I was a longtime faculty. I teach Chinese and ESL and focus on business etiquette for 12 years. And I've been in ESL field for, 20 years. So I am a big fan of collaborations. I believe that through collaboration, that's how we can bring our community together and bring economic development. So those are just partners that I work with, and I will really briefly only give them, there's a lot of project involved in it, but I will just give shout outs 1-2 lines for each one. So AJAC, we did a pandemic COVID safety trainings in collaborations that through how do we help manufacturers have their workers come back safely. For Club for the Future, we're trying to look at how can we help them, support them to foster more aerospace investors. For First Washington, we are looking into supporting their coach training programs. How do we foster their coaches, and how do we, in our community, find more coaches to allow our students to have more opportunities and even maybe possibilities, Green River hosting some of the camps. For NASA, our PTAC later on, you will see one of the slides that focused on how PTAC had worked with NASA and then trying to help our local businesses to be able to contract with them. For St. Vincent de Paul, we are trying to close equity gap to use our JSP job skill program fundings to help them provide soft skill trainings. So it's a work excellence certification for all their managers. But locally for St. Vincent St. Vincent de Paul, right over here is Central Rendu. We are looking at youth excellence certification to help our youth to learn soft skills. For Space United, we just did some outreach with their soccer team, and we're looking into how do we support their goals of united the sports of soccer and aerospace, and all their athletes are aerospace engineers. So we're looking into how can we collaborate and bring that pipelines. That leads to the UW Northwest Earth and Space Science pipelines. Later on, I will present one as one of examples to look at how do we really encourage students from K-12 going to community college and looking in and thinking going to Mars is not a dream. It is something that's doable. Especially for kids who were born in 2000. If they were born after 2000, the whole their entire lifetime they live on this earth, someone living on space. So it's not that far apart. For World Relief, we are looking at new immigrants. There will be more immigrants coming into our city, especially South King County. How can we support them, allow them to, if they want to be entrepreneur, be entrepreneur. If they want to transition to new careers, how do we help them? Create that sense of belongings. As an adult immigrant myself, I think it is very important to have that sense of belonging because I'm here because other people believe in me. And it's the people in my community who believe in me. Next. So here are two examples, and you might notice I'm speaking a little bit faster than I usually do in my classrooms. Because I feel I want to save some time so you can ask whatever questions that you would like to know. This is a business community navigator portal that I'm working with the City of Kent, so thank you to Bill and Michelle. We're hoping to utilize it, and so then there is a portal that people can use, that we will have navigators that's within the community, that's already with the community, to be able to navigate different resources. So far, people have to go to different places, and then maybe betting on the luck that you connect with someone that you feel connected with to get that support. If this launched, then we have one more tools that people can utilize. So our Green River Small Business Center will be working with the navigators or even hosting navigators. This is just a project that we're moving forward towards to how do we close the equity gap for our local businesses. Next. This is an example of our PTAC program. PTAC, the procurement center, people think government contract, what does that do with aerospace, right? So we actually hosted the aerospace conference so people get to listen to the presenters from NASA, Space Force, and other entities, and then understanding how do you do business with those people. And also knowing if your business scales are not big enough, there's still other opportunities for you. So then they get to meet during that conference. I think the most precious thing is they can meet one-on-one with the representative or from NASA Primes, which are the subcontractors, to know, how can you up your skills and slowly move into that pipeline if that's your dream. So for local business, through this conference, they can see not just where they are at, assessing what they can do, but what they could be in the future. Next. The teacher certification program. So you might have seen a small business center jump through aerospace conference, navigator, community navigator, and now going to teacher certification. Because I oversee continuing education, and which is one of the passions that I have. And I'm also a K-12 certified teacher. This is a program that's very unique, and I'm very proud of it. It's a work in progress. We're looking for local fundings, but it's something that I believe if I can dream it, I can get it. So just like I'm going to Mars someday. So for teacher certification, we are looking into a 2 summer, 10 weeks, so total of 20 weeks trainings for high school teachers, for them to learn about STEM, but it's not just like go to the program, learn it, and then go home and forget. The purpose of this program is dedicated that you come, you learn it, you design your lesson plan on site. Then you have the coach work with you, go back to your classroom, use it, and you come back and you revise it, and you continue to improve. This is something that I did a lot of teacher trainings internationally, and this is something that I feel like talking about this project is just amazing, and it's wonderful to get this opportunity. And thank you to Bill for connecting me with the UW, because I'm only 2 years into this role, and so connection is very important. But I think we are in good progress with this one, and we're just trying to figure out, how do we get the logistics work so that our dream can be true, and see the teachers in cohort and work together. Yeah. Next. So for having all those projects, I think it's important to talk about how do we really increase the awareness, because we have noticed that even though we did wonderfully with the city, we work with chambers a lot, there's still a big chunk of businesses that we are not connecting with. So we launched the website. We noticed, okay, we have the website, but how do we drive people to the website? So we start looking into a Facebook page, LinkedIn page, we start purchasing ads. But the other thing that I did not mention on here is that we work with our community partners. I believe that it's only our community partners like St. Vincent de Paul, Central Rendu, World Relief, that they're already in the community working with our new immigrants and business owners to be able to connect and then have that trust to open that door to connect to those resources. So those are something that we are doing, trying to improve, and we will continue to explore how we're going to close the equity gap. We are thinking of having interpreters to support our business advisor as well. Next, Q&A. So I'm ready for questions. I hope I meet my timeline.
Wonderful presentation. I have to say, you know your stuff for only being there for 2 years.
I love my stuff.
Any questions? Councilmember Boyce.
Another question. Hey, thanks for the presentation. Just a comment. I think you stay hooked up the bill, you will do well. He got good connection. I think the two of you guys working together, especially AJAT, really can help us to form a good partnership. So thank you very much for
Thank you very much. And Bill is wonderful, and I think it's also wonderful that he has a great vision too, not just a good connector, but we can bounce ideas. And AJAC is a wonderful partner. I'm looking forward to strengthen our manufacturing industries here. Thank you.
Great. Councilmember Fincher.
Thank you. So if there's a business who is looking, or rather, what's the best way for businesses to come to you if they want to partner with you? To be going through Bill, going through you, who should they contact? And some of our small existing businesses, so for instance, during lunch today, I was talking to a business owner who wanted some art done. And so we were talking about ways that she could find artists. And I also told her about the services that are going to be offered in the new program. So what is the best way for them to do that?
I think the best way is for partnering. Then I think if it's a partner, like for example, my collaboration with the AJAC, that kind of partnering, I think I'm the right person that they can talk to and bounce the ideas and build it together. For getting the support, if the partnering is more like how do I grow my business, connect with the other business, I think the best way is to contact our small business center through our website and then schedule a one-on-one advising and then explore from there. Because we even for our small business center, when we're trying to choose who is going to be our partners helping us develop a website, we look into our own clients. Yeah.
But for the organizations, have them contact you.
Yeah, for organizations that haven't contacted me, feel free. They can, just stop by our campus and say, I would like to see the dean. I will be open. My office door never closed, and also, or just give me a call through my cell phone. I answer my cell phone as well, or send an email. There's many ways that we can connect. Or if you already have the name or a list of names or organizations I should connect with, I can be proactive. I believe it's reaching out, right?
Okay, thank you. And last one, I believe you were the person who facilitated one of the early calls. It was with a number of people from Taiwan.
Yes.
There were a number of people here. You mentioned your little niece and the practices she had after getting dinner. We were talking about COVID. But that was just a phenomenal call. I was glad because there were scientists there, there were educators, different levels of elected folks. So thank you very much. That was a very good call. Lots of information.
Thank you so much. It is, I went through SARS on my own when I was in Taiwan. I lost a friend there. And so it's very personal to how I want to protect our community. I would say that we did intentionally to have a doctor there, to have an educator there, to have principal, university president, to have K-12 teachers there. But I think the most important is that the trust from our community who's willing to attend, right? Because I can host a big event, no one attend. So thank you for the support from the cities, because cities are the one helping spread out the words.
You even had the kindergartners there with K-12 teachers.
Right. They're still saying that when they're going to meet you guys next. I told them maybe next.
Wonderful. Any other questions or comments? All right. Thank you so much for joining us today.
Thank you so much for the opportunity. Thank you.
All right, moving on, we have some more information on the appointment of our commissions, and this is to correct the link, the appointments for some of our members, and I will welcome Tammy to walk us through this.
Thank you. Good
Thank you.
afternoon. Tammy White, Deputy City Attorney. I'd like, Madam President, if it's okay with you, to discuss the two items that follow kind of together. So you'll have in your packets two spreadsheets. They are the same. It's just the first item deals with correcting term appointments for some of our members on our commissions, and then the other is dealing with ratifying the reappointment of some other members. So this project started with, I think it was a question or request from Councilmember Boyce, or it could have been Councilmember Larmer, about how are term limits going to impact our commission members. So as I started to look into that question, I became aware of sort of a bigger issue. And so we had some inconsistency with our appointments. So most of the appointments were supposed to be for a term of a year or 3 years or 4 years. Unfortunately, when they were presented to council, the term that was being requested to confirm them to did not match up with that available seat. So even though the blue sheet had said an individual was going to be posted to a 3-year term, the actual dates that were given were maybe only 2 years. And so what I have before you on the first item is seeking to correct a number of terms for current members. And the purpose of doing it now is that the ordinance that you adopted for our boards and commissions takes effect on August 5th. So addressing this issue at tonight's meeting, assuming it moves on, it would take action at our August 3rd council meeting. So then these changes would be in effect at the time the new ordinance takes effect. So I was asked to go through and do a complete reconciliation of all of the appointments that we have to make sure they are as correct as possible, so that when the term limits come into play, everything is accurate. So what I did is I looked at the most current term to which they were appointed, and I tried to correct it so that it would be a full term based on the date that you took action to confirm them to that role. We've now worked, the clerk is going to be working with the commission secretaries to ensure we have a better process moving forward, so that when you get new confirmations that are coming before you, it will have both a start and an end date, and it will use the dates that I used for my reconciliation as kind of the starting point. So we should not have this issue occur again in the future. So that's the first issue, is dealing with correcting the term appointments. There is one provision there. I just found out before I came down here, our Human Services Commission, the information that I have in the motion sheet before you tonight is not entirely accurate.
Yeah.
So the current appointment for Dr. Reverend Joyce Perrymore, apparently she has resigned from that position. So I do need to work with the Parks Department to go through and confirm that everything that I presented to you tonight is in fact correct. And so any deviations that I make between tonight and when it comes to you on August 3rd, assuming you pass it out of here, will be correct, and I will make sure that you can see any differences that may be before what you have tonight versus what you're going to get on August 3rd.
Councilmember Thomas, do you have a question?
I do, real quick. Thank you, Madam Chair. Tammy, since you're on Human Services Commission on the second page, I don't see a name connected to the very top entry.
I'm sorry, what was that?
I do not see a name connected to the very first entry on Human Services Commission, second page. Is there something there on the previous page?
Your version that was published could be different than the one that I'm looking at. Okay.
It's the one after Bill Hallerman.
That is Bill Hallerman.
That's the same one? Okay, never mind then. This is Joe.
Okay.
Thank you.
Sure. So then the second item is we have some other commission members who have continued to serve, but there wasn't a formal reappointment and confirmation process before you. And so based on their continued service, some of it has been for a period of time, what I have before you is a ratification of their reappointment and confirmation to that position. And again, this is just to make sure that all of our terms are as clear as they can be, so that when your ordinance takes effect on August 5th, it can be correctly applied.
So are you open for questions now?
Yeah, I'm
All
open
right.
for any questions you have for me.
So as I'm looking through this list, I'm noticing that we have a large number of commissioners that term will be ending. And it may come as a surprise to a lot of these people. Have we reached out to any of these commissioners? And if so, what kind of reaction are we getting?
And I might have to defer that over to Derek Matheson or other city staff that are here, but this is an issue that's been discussed with the executive leadership team. All of the directors have been given this information, all of the staff members that support these commissions, and so I know there have been some outreach efforts, but I'm not clear on the specifics.
So, Council President, I'm happy to let you know what I know at this point. I am contacting commissioners, and I'm taking them in order of how quickly their terms are ending and having the rather difficult conversation of, thank you for your service. Yeah. You're done unless we don't get a qualified candidate. Could you please come back? And I'm keeping notes on people that are willing to do that. It's definitely awkward and uncomfortable, but working my way through the list.
Well, thank you. I do think it's important that we're at least trying to explain to these commissioners this situation. And
I've had a couple ask what they had done wrong, and I explained that that wasn't the case. But for the most part, people are taking it well. But it's just like, if you look at Arts Commission, that's close to half the Arts Commission that is rotating off, and in that, and Councilmember Fincher knows this well, that's a you have to show up and work commission. So those are a lot of the folks that do our ticket taking and that kind of thing.
And so I did try to provide for you each, on the spreadsheet for each commission, I tried at the very bottom to include a summary so you could see the number of positions that were unfilled, those that were filled, and which ones were going to be impacted roughly around what time by term limit too. I was trying to give you as much information as I could in a snapshot document.
Well, you've done a great job through this whole process. I know we've had this conversation multiple times, and you've come back with all your changes, and then this detailed information is exactly what people were asking for. So thank you.
Great, thank you.
We're going to start with Councilmember Boyce.
Thank you. I think the concept, what we're trying to do, makes sense. I might get it. I mean, I've never been a big fan of this here. I think we shifted way far to the left, right? I mean, I look at so many committees here. I mean, and I know it's our job to go out and replace and bring more people in. Hopefully we can do this here, but one thing I talked about earlier in our conversation, just trying the continuity, how you can maybe 2 on, 3 off, so you can rotate them as they go on. But I look at a couple of these committees, for example, if I take out the lodging tax, everybody's gone in 2022, right? The whole entire committee is gone.
Wiped
I
out.
think if you, it's Kirk, so you ask Kirk or anybody, and I've been the council rep on that committee, it's like pulling teeth to get people to come on that. And there's only so many hotelers in the city that serve on this area. I think you ask Kirk, they do a good job of asking them and asking, and they'll come on for a day, then they're gone. And the ones that we have up here are the ones who want to be up here. And I think the fact that, I mean, for me, thank you for your service, and then, hey, if I don't get no one else, I'll call you back. I don't know how I will personally feel about that. But I just want to say that I think the concept of what we're trying to do is probably the right thing. I just don't like the approach. I've never been a big fan, but I also want to be a good council member, and sometimes it's not about me, support my other council member. And I guess we'll just kind of play this out and see how it works. But I just think it's too far extreme to the other side, but we'll just see how it goes. That's my own personal comments. And I thank you for all you've done, and I think you did a good job of really just kind of putting all this together, makes sense, and we could have a handful, I don't know, with staff and of course council members trying to go out and recruit and get people to serve, show up, and do the homework, right? So that's going to be, I would like for us to kind of keep track of this here as we go on, because I want to make sure if it's not working, we may need to look at this again. If it's working, then that's what it's supposed to do. Thank you.
Great comment at the end. I think that is a valid concern and something that we do need to keep an eye on. I'm going to turn to Councilmember Larmer, followed by Kaur, then Fincher, then Thomas.
Thank you. So, Tammy, so I just want to confirm, the ones that are marked on our sheet in red that will be expiring, it's at the end of their current term. So several of these are 22, 23, so we have, a year or two to recruit. Also, I do feel like, I hear your concern, Councilmember Boyce, but I do think we dealt with it in our last modification to accommodate the ones, especially the ones that have the special qualifications, and we know that those are hard to recruit for. When I look at the sheet and I see vacancies in those, boards and commissions already, it makes me feel, somewhat confident that those folks will probably be able to continue, just because we do know that those are harder ones to fill. So I think adding that change to our original ordinance was a good call. That they can absolutely continue if no one else steps forward with the correct qualifications in these ones that have specific qualifications to them, so.
I just comment real quick. I thought that you're right, the one that was hard. So why is left one up there? I mean, I thought that would have been the one that we would excluded. And there's a certain, I don't know, I thought you made, by saying it, you kind of maybe think of something. I thought that was one that we decided we wasn't going to touch, but maybe, do anybody recall the conversation? Because that is a hard one. And the people who's up here have a certain skill set about the retirement process. I mean, I could not go and serve in this committee not knowing the retirement process. So I thought that was one that we decided to exclude.
Can I can jump in here. So we did have a discussion about that, but at one of the prior the council, sorry, but I mean, I was kind of there with the discussion, but we had a discussion about whether or not we should exempt out some of the commissions. And at the end of the day, council had agreed that there would be no exceptions. It would apply, term limits would apply across the board. And so that's the version that was in the final ordinance that council adopted.
And I think that was largely due to the fact that knowing that these have very specific special requirements. I mean, you can't serve on this unless you are a fire representative or a police representative.
Left one, do we have qualifications for all of these here, or do we have qualifications just for left one?
There are some of the commissions that have certain qualifications. So civil service has some certain qualification provisions. Left one,
lodging tax, yeah.
the disability board, and then the fireman's relief and pension board have certain qualifications.
Okay, thank you.
All right, Councilmember Corn, just a reminder, make sure you turn your microphones on when you're going to speak. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you for all the work you're doing, Tammy. This list was very thorough, and I enjoyed reading it. As you know, there was one little typo. I don't know if it matters or not, but I saw that under Arts Commission for Dubois, it says 2 RD full-term appointment. I think that means 3rd.
Oh, yes. Yeah. My apologies.
I just wanted to point that out. I don't know if that matters for legal. And the other thing is the messaging isn't that to our current commissioners that we don't want you back or that we only want you back if no one applies. We're trying to make room for new individuals in our community who want to serve. We're trying to see if they want to serve in this capacity, and we would still love to have you back, but we just need to wait to see if we want somebody new to take, they're interested. So I think we just need to make it more positive because we appreciate all the work they're doing. We're just trying to get our new individuals living in our community, new residents or anybody who's a youth wanting to serve or, just people who have been living here who want to be involved civically now at some point, because they have had some changes in their life. So we just want to make sure that we are bringing fresh blood to the table. That's kind of the point of this. So thank you.
Thank you, Councilmember Fincher, followed by Thomas, and then back to Councilmember Larmer.
Thank you very much, Madam Chair. And that was just what I was going to say. I think the messaging is important. It's not that we don't want you here. It's not that you did something wrong. It's that we are trying to make space. Kent is a far different city than it was in 1990, in 2012, in 2004, when some of the people have been serving, for quite a while. And the other part that you're not the second choice. You're not somebody who we don't want here. There is that part in there that says if no one else applies, no one else who is qualified applies. So we're not going to just shove anybody into that position either. We still want to make sure that there are people who are going to be ready to do the work, people who are signing up for the right reasons. And so I think it's important that we open it up so that other people can step forward if they do. And it is incumbent on all of us as well as our social media, for us to do the regular recruitment that we would normally do for other positions, not just simply are, going to people who we know or the small circle who is already involved, but to open that up. Have we advertised for any of these? Because some of these are expiring, for instance, in October. Have we done anything yet, or no, we were waiting till all of this is solidified?
And I can't speak to the law department isn't involved in the individual appointments, so I'm not sure what actions the assistants have taken.
So, Councilmember Fincher, for the Arts Commission position, we've had an alternate open for quite some time. Right. So that there's a continuous recruitment that's happening there. So we'll be recruiting for the alternate and then all 5 of those positions and we're continuing to do that. It's an ongoing process.
Okay, and there was conversation about being able to have some consistency, and so we'll be watching that, as Councilmember Boyce had noted. We will be keeping an eye on all of that. And I see we have someone else.
I just wanted to note that staff is beginning work on a checklist that can be applied across all of our commissions and ensure that we're in compliance with the letter of the ordinance as well as the intent of the council as we start to recruit for these positions in the future.
And we will be helping with that recruitment. So hopefully it works, but at least we need to see if we can improve some of the people who are able to apply and be posted. Thank you.
Councilmember Thomas.
Thank you, Madam Chair. So, my first question was in regard to what Bill was, Councilmember Boyce was talking about in his area. I mean, the whole committee is wiped out, basically, I want to understand one thing before I say too much more. I've heard two different things. Somebody said this is in effect but on August 5th, and I'm assuming that that's not all of these. These guys go to the time that their expiration is over, their commitment's over. Okay, then that's a little bit easier to live with. But I really feel for the mayor because I've been in situations like that. Oh, Mr. Thomas, you're doing a great job. You're very professional. You're very experienced. You really know your stuff, but we're going to have to let you go. I go, why? Well, we just are. And so I'm left with a lot of questions. And if I was receiving a phone call from the mayor, which I would appreciate, that was nice, and then all of a sudden she's saying, we're going to have to let you go, you're no longer wanted. That's what I'm saying. That's how I'm feeling it if I received this phone call. I'm no longer wanted by the city. The mayor or somebody doesn't like me in City Hall. And maybe that's the wrong feeling, but when I first initially started going through this, that's what I felt. And I don't know how others feel. And I want to let you know, this is amazing amount of work that you compiled here. And I really appreciate it because it tells me a lot of stuff. Yeah, it was good. You did really good. But I just wanted to express how I'm feeling, Madam Chairman. That's where it all.
Thank you, Councilmember Thomas. Councilmember Boyce.
Yeah, as I look through this once again, what was the thought process on, we got some of the committees got 3 or 4 open vacant spots, right? So I would think we will try to fill those up before telling someone that you can't serve on the committee. I mean, why would we, and we probably should have thought about this, we might have talked about it, I don't recall, so here we are. So to me, I would think that you would go after, try to fill the vacant spot first, before I tell someone you're no longer able to serve. And I know that's not a question for you. I'm just throwing this out to my peers on the dais. Just kind of wonder why did we not focus on the open spot before?
I think that's taken care of in the language of if no one else applies. If there's a vacancy, obviously nobody is applying or nobody qualified is applying. So
say it again now. I'm sorry.
the language that we included that if there were no other.
Sorry, Councilmember Lormer.
Oh, it is. Yeah.
Go ahead.
So I think that, correct me if I'm wrong here, Tammy, but I think the language we included about if there's no other applicants would be applicable in this case, because if there's a vacant seat, there's obviously no applicants.
So I think you could look at it a couple different ways, assuming a commission has, 2 open spots or even 1 open spot and a couple that are coming up. If you're going to pull from the same applicant pool, so you're going out at the same time, then theoretically, if you don't have enough to fill every spot, then a sitting member would be able to serve again. But a lot of it's going to be determinative upon how many folks do you get in that applicant pool to make your selection from. And then now also under the ordinance, it allows the mayor in establishing the applicant pool not to select just from those that apply for a particular commission, but to go back to the larger pool for folks maybe who applied to a different commission and see if they'd be interested in serving on another one. It does make the appointment process a bit more challenging.
So let me just make sure I understand. So, for example, let's say, I don't know, September 1st, my term is up, okay? And this is July now, and there's already 3 open spots. So will we start recruiting for the 3 open spots, like, soon, right? And then I'm assuming there's
We should be recruiting for them already, right?
okay, soon, well, I'm assuming in the example. So there's a cutoff when you cut the application off, right? So if you don't get the people to fill the vacant spot, I'm assuming that person will get to stay, right?
I think that's an option that you could interpret the ordinance and apply it that way. That's how I would, Councilmember Boyce, is that if you have 3 spots, including the one who is up, and you have only 2 applicants, you have an extra spot that you need someone, so you could allow that person to continue to remain because you have the 2 vacancies. I think there's some room for discretion in applying the ordinance, but I would interpret and apply it the way that you just have, Councilmember Boyce.
And my last item, Mayor, you got a tough job. I mean, because it's a perception, right? And people perceive things differently, right? Some people say, well, good, I'm okay, and some may take it like less, don't want me, right? So I think, I know me, if I go on a job interview, I don't want to be second, I won't take the job, I'm not first, but it's just me, right? So, but I just think we just need to be careful how we communicate that and make sure people understand what it is that we're trying to do, and like I said, I think the concept is fine, I just think, yeah. Anyway, I'm good, I'm through.
Thank you, Councilmember Boyce. Councilmember Larmer.
Thank you. Yeah, and I'm confident that we're framing it in the intent of the ordinance and not making it, feel targeted or dismissive. My question actually is I have a question for Tammy. Is there anything, thinking about the earlier comment about the Arts Commission, some of the working commissions where we rely on the commissioners to be volunteers as well, is there anything that would prohibit a commission from deciding to include non-voting emeritus members? I know my husband's on a board, and his term just ended, so he just became an emeritus member. So
Well, I think some of the commissions, I believe, have set seats. So some of them are limited to 18 folks or 10 folks or 13 folks. So that would be, I would consider that to be a position that would need to be authorized and provided for in the ordinance.
All right, Councilmember Michaud.
Thank you for all your work on this, Tammy. When this first came about, I emphasized that we really need to have a balance of experience along with new people on the commission. And so when I was looking at the list, it was kind of, I had some concerns that we were wiping out an entire commission. And I served on the Parks Commission for a long time. At the same time, we always had a limit. And so I knew that after 6 years that I would have to do something else. So this is tough. I can understand. I would have been upset if Julie came to me and said, sorry, but we can't have you on here anymore. So I get it. I don't know what the right answer is, but I can understand that people feel like they're just being dismissed. At the same time, I also understand that we want to have a variety of people on commissions and boards. So I don't know what the right answer is, but I can see both sides of it. And I do really think it is super important that we have experienced people on the boards.
Thank you, Councilmember Michaud. Councilmember Fincher.
Thank you. Looking at, and for instance, Art Commission, 15 positions, 14 are filled, 4 are up in 21. Then there's 2 more years before the next group is up. So as far as the continuity for that particular position or that particular committee, it's already built in so that they're going to be rolling off. But in the situation of that Councilmember Boyce was talking about, where it might be a full committee, wasn't there also something that we wrote in there that someone can be asked to stay in a committee if there was some reason such as the continuity reason?
We didn't have an exception for that. The only exception that allowed continued service was if there was nobody else available or willing to serve, or they had a gap in service. So say they left the Parks Commission, did something else for 2 years, and then they came back, then they'd be able to serve again. So it was either nobody else or a gap in service.
Okay, thank you.
Councilmember Thomas.
Actually, Councilmember Boyce concern was like in the Arts Commission. I was concerned about that too, because we actually have 5 in the 21 going off in October. And I think between what you said, Brenda, and what Boyce and Councilmember Boyce, I think I've answered, or you guys have answered the concern that I had. It looks like it's going to be okay. Thank you.
All right, any other questions or comments? All right, so Councilmember Boyce did bring up a good point. I do think it's really important that we continue to watch this process. We listen to our commissioners and their conversations as far as, if they're reapplying, if they don't get chosen, if they choose then to just not be on the board at that point, or if they decide to do another term if they're the only ones left. I do think that it's really important that we are continuing to look at that and decide if, we do need to make adjustments to this. So, Tammy, again, thank you very much. This was a lot of work, but we have two motions before us. The first one is for correcting the length of the appointment for members, and the next is to ratify reappointments of members. So is everyone okay moving this forward to consent? All right, wonderful.
Great.
Thank you again.
Mayor.
All right, and next up we have an ordinance amending the Kent City Code to talk about wireless facilities.
Good afternoon. Christina, Schuck, Assistant City Attorney. I'm here this afternoon to discuss some code amendments to the wireless facilities. And these are amendments to Title 6 and 15. It regards small cells and also non-small cells. So I will be handling the first portion of the presentation and focusing on the amendments that pertain to small cells or small wireless facilities. And then you'll hear from Aaron George regarding updates to Title 15 and non-small cell facilities. So this afternoon, we will be discussing a little bit about the regulatory framework in which we have to operate. I will give you a brief update on small cell deployment in the city. We'll go through the purpose and the objectives of the code amendments, the stakeholder outreach that we conducted, and then we'll look in more detail at the code amendments before you. So just as a refresher, most of us have talked a lot about small cells together. Small wireless facilities is the federal term which the code amendments will be adopting. And that is, I call it a dimensional definition. If it meets all of these dimensional requirements, it is a small cell. So that is a limit on height to about 50 feet or 10% increase in height to the existing structure. The antennas can be no more than 3 cubic feet, and the rest of the equipment is no more than 28 cubic feet. So any wireless facility that fits within these dimensions is a small cell or a small wireless facility. As a reminder, the code currently authorizes small wireless facilities on utility poles, like PSC poles you see in the right-of-way, combination poles, which are a combination of a street light and a small cell, and then we'll also talk tonight about a new authorization of small cells on cables. It's called strand mounted, and so that would be on the cables between utility poles. Again, as a refresher of the legal framework, small wireless facilities and wireless facilities in general are regulated by a myriad of federal, state, and local laws. Local authority is very limited. The city can regulate safety, design, and placement, but in so doing, we cannot unreasonably discriminate among carriers, prohibit, or even having the effect of a prohibiting service, and we cannot regulate based on radio frequency emissions. You will find city regulations and standards for small wireless facilities in the agreements themselves. So you've seen franchise and master license agreements authorizing these deployments. There's some regulations in 615, and the bulk of them, and what I'm focusing my talk tonight on, are in Chapter 616. And then there's also some in 1508, which Aaron will talk about. Just to bring you up to speed on what's been happening in small cells in Kent, so you'll all probably remember that you adopted franchises with AT&T, Verizon, and Extenet. In 2019 and 2020, you did a big code amendment in 2019. Since then, starting in November, 39 permits have actually been submitted for small cells. There are numerous other locations under consideration, and so we expect the first installations to come up this year. Now, the objectives of the code amendments, as permits started coming in, the city staff noticed some gaps in our regulations. And we were anticipating this because you may recall in 2019, the FCC mandated cities, if we wanted to regulate design standards, we had to adopt a code. So we did it rather quickly and before 5G technology had really been fleshed out. So we expected to have some tweaks to the code. And so that's what a lot of that was prompted by the applications we were actually seeing. To address some gaps, we wanted to add in additional protections for residential areas and then also enhance flexibility. So we were seeing some new designs and we wanted to update some definitions so we're better in line with federal code. We did a lot of outreach on these code amendments. So we started an initial draft back in November of 2020 when the first permits started coming in. We sent a draft to 4 industry stakeholders. They all have agreements with the city. They sent us a lot of comments, and we worked through them and incorporated quite a bit of them in a draft that started the public process in May through SEPA, and you'll see we sent it to the Department of Commerce and then again back to the stakeholders on June 14th. It went to Land Use and Planning Board. On the 12th, there was public comment and a notice associated with that public hearing. And then we also did follow up after the Land Use and Planning Board. So let's look at more detail at the code amendments. So the first, I'm kind of grouping the code amendments in, there's a lot of iterations of this ordinance, as you can kind of see through your packet. So the first code amendments I want to talk about were the early ones. And they were all in the ordinance that went to Land Use Planning Board. And so these code amendments allow a lot of flexibility. So we allow as an exception ground-mounted equipment. For example, this allows strand mounts, small cells, and just make some clarifications on coloring and designs. And to focus in on some of the more substantive code amendments. So one big change is the strand-mounted small wireless facility. So this allows small cells to be installed on the cable between utility poles. Many other cities do this. We had prohibited it initially, but that was a comment we received from all 4 industry stakeholders who responded. They all asked to have strand-mounted facilities. So we took a look at what other cities are doing, and we modeled these code amendments very heavily after what we're seeing in other cities. And so this really tries to limit their visual impact, limits their size, 1 per cable, keeps it from crossing the roadway. Another change is allowing a new combination pole design. This came in as a request from one of the carriers. As 5G is being more widespread deployed throughout the country and the region, the designs you can imagine, are changing. So this actually works, I think, in the city's favor, a new design where everything is internal to the pole. So we went ahead and are recommending that we adopt this new design to allow for this more streamlined look. City staff also, in the draft that went to the Land Use and Planning Board, recommended some more residential protections for residential areas. And I'm using the term residential area to include single family and multi-family. So staff had, in the initial draft, said small wireless facilities should be prohibited outside of the right-of-way in residential areas. And this is to limit clutter and keep them in the right-of-way, keep them off houses, and really try to limit their impact. In comments we received from AT&T and Verizon just a couple of days before the Land Use and Planning Board hearing and after the packet went out, they had asked for exception to that prohibition. And so that was a big focus of the discussion at Land Use Planning Board. And so what Land Use Planning Board landed on was allowing, so small wireless facilities are prohibited outside of the right-of-way in residential areas, except in public parks and public school campuses with a 30-foot setback. So that was the recommendation that you received from the Land Use and Planning Board.
Councilmember Lermer, you have your hand raised.
Yeah, thank you, Council President. Question about the exemption. So I just want to be really clear. So the Exempting public parks and public school campuses. That was proposed by the industry. That was one of the exceptions they sought.
Correct.
Okay, I'm trying to, I guess, understand why they would want that exemption and what that might look like. Are we opening ourselves up to have a clutter of these in public space, in a public park, or like a myriad of them on a school campus?
It's possible, right? So we'll talk about public parks because it's a little easier because they are the city parks. So there would be allowed under this ordinance in city parks, but you'd have to have the city's express permission as the property owner. So for property the city controls as a property owner, you could prevent the proliferation as the property owner. Of course, school campuses are a different situation. So my understanding of the carrier's request is that, a lot of elementary schools and sometimes even community colleges are in residential areas. They want those students to have this technology. That was something that Land Use and Planning Board discussed as well. So
what's the radius? So if we had, a small cell outside, if they're in residential areas and it was on a right-of-way, not far from the school, would it not provide that service to the school?
That's what they're saying, is that sometimes you'd be out of that radius.
Okay. Do we have any way of restricting the number? I mean, because I'm concerned that we would have, AT&T wants one on school, Verizon wants one on the school property,
That is a choice that you have. I think that something we could add into this provision is fleshing that out more and what makes sense. So that is definitely a choice you have to consider.
Yeah, I think I would like to move to strike that exemption until we can maybe talk about it and get some more information on how we might prevent a proliferation in those locations.
Councilmember Boyce, do you have a comment on that or a new question?
Christina, you've been on this for a while, right? I know you was Mercer Island, I think, where you was at, right? Yeah. So what some of the other places, based on your knowledge and expertise, what have you seen? And I hear what you're saying, Councilman Milano. I'm just kind of just curious what's historically has happened in some of the school area.
So I did take a look at what other cities are doing, and so it's a really mixed bag, honestly. And so the one takeaway that is a generalization is most cities are more protective of residential areas, just across the board. So that looks different. So what a lot of cities do with small cells outside of the right-of-way, sometimes like Federal Way, I think, allows them except on residential uses. So you could have them, my reading of their code would mean you could have them on schools, but you couldn't have them on residents in a residential area. So that's how Federal Way does it. Mercer Island has really targeted, they don't have a prohibition anywhere, but they have really defined design standards if you're off the right-of-way and on a building or on something that isn't the right-of-way. So unfortunately, there are a lot of choices here on how to approach residential areas.
Just a follow-up. So with the school, I didn't hear what your answer to Councilman Maloney's question was. How far do it reach out, for access and so on? There's a greater reach out.
So small cells do have a smaller range, especially 5G, right? Because
smaller range.
So I'm getting my technology, but the way the millimeter waves work, they have to be closer to the user. So if it's 5G technology, my understanding is you'd have to be closer to the user, which means, like Councilor Larimer said, if the right-of-way is set, if the school is set back more than 150 feet from the right-of-way, a pole on the right-of-way, that technology may not reach the school. Plus, as I understand it, it's impeded by things, even doors, so it doesn't go very far. So that is, I think, one of the reasons why they're asking to have that exception, because they might not be able to reach the schools from the right-of-way.
And is that because, just still trying to understand the motivation behind it. Is that because in other cities they've had difficulties with that? Specifically to schools, or?
Well, I think they're probably just looking at the technology and the range of it. And yes, I think they did tell us about, I think they said Bellevue, Bellevue Community College is in a residential area, and so this would keep, as it was originally drafted, to keep them in the right of way. They couldn't have 5G technology like on a community college campus in a residential area.
And keep in mind, we have standards, right? A look and feel on what they can look like, right? It's not going to be like they sitting in the front all cluttered up, right?
I'm just wondering, are we going to have 5 spread across the Strand?
I hope not, right? So I think there's a look and feel that we have put into some of our requirements on what they can and can't do, right?
Yes, we mostly are regulating on poles. So one thing we do not have in our code as drafted, and I'm going to look at Aaron too, is that we don't have standards for small cells on buildings. So if an application came in, I don't know, let's use a school, like an elementary school as an example, on a street light in the parking lot, we can handle that. Our code can handle that. We would have exactly the design standards that you all have discussed. But if it came in on a building or something outside of a pole, I think that is a gap in our regulations.
So I'm sorry, Council, this last one. So for a school, we don't own the school, the city, right? So I mean, there's boundaries, right? So there's only a certain far they can go. They just can't put it on top of the school without the Kent School District giving them thumbs up.
Correct. They would have to get the school's permission, the property. Okay.
Property, yeah. Okay.
I'm sorry, Christina, just
for parks, and they would.
I'm sorry.
So essentially, they need our permission to place them in parks
as the property owner. So it's
Property
good to
owner,
think
and-
about like city as a regulator, city as property owner.
Okay, and the same thing then applies to the school district for schools.
Right.
Put them on a school. Okay. Right. Okay.
and sorry, Christina, just a couple more questions. Councilmember Fincher, followed by Councilmember Michaud.
My question is on the 30 feet from the property line. So the school is here, house is right next door. So if we're trying to protect the residential area, 30 feet isn't really that far away. So do we have any wiggle room in that? Could we make it 50 feet? Does it have to be 30 feet? Is that the max? What's the deal there?
I'm going to ask Erin to come up and speak to setbacks because she is more familiar with property line setbacks.
Good evening. Yeah, excellent question, Councilmember Fincher. The provision that you're seeing there on the screen with the 30 feet was developed kind of on the fly at the Land Use and Planning Board hearing when this suggestion came up. I suggested it based on other setbacks that we have in our zoning code. So in general, our building setbacks in residential districts, our bigger setbacks are 20 to 30 feet from property lines. So just for a consistency measure, that's what we propose, but it is up to the council what you'd like to suggest. One thing I would keep in mind is that we are allowing small cells in the right-of-way, and remember that right-of-ways do cross in front of homes, right. So it's really not super possible to make these not visible from residents. I think the goal is just to keep them, not right next to your house and trying to set them back a little ways.
And would we have any say into the choice? I mean, we've given them a range of what the design standards are. Would they have the choice of anything that fits into those design standards, or could we say that this would fit better here than this type model because of where you are?
It's my understanding, and tell me if I'm wrong, but that anything that fit within the design standards would be allowed. I think the only thing that we're dictating is if it's on a light standard, it has to be the self-contained certain combination pole. Is that correct? Correct. Yeah.
Okay. Thank you very much.
Councilmember Michaud.
Thank you, Council President. Some of my questions have already been answered, but okay, just want to clarify. So we do not have any design standards for these on buildings.
That is correct.
So if we were to pass this, they could do whatever on the school?
Correct.
Right. So I'm not comfortable passing that. And then my question is, when staff presented this to the Land Use and Planning Board, this was not in there. So correct. What was your reasoning for that?
So the carriers brought it up and asked that it be added, and the board members agreed with it and asked that we add it and asked for my recommendation from staff's perspective, what staff felt. And so the carriers also asked about churches. So thinking about it from a public standpoint, I was not concerned about parks because we are the property owner and we have the ability to approve those and have a lot of control over location, design, and all that. Public schools, I was thinking of the school district being an approval authority, but churches just seemed like it was going too far, and so I said that staff was not in favor of allowing on churches. So that's the reasoning where it came from.
Okay, so they did not, the carriers did not request this before that meeting?
I think it was the day of.
Okay. Okay.
They came in, the comments came, the meeting was on the 12th. They had the ordinance on the 14th of June. We got comments the 8th and 9th of July, which was Thursday and Friday before the Monday hearing.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you. Any more questions on the this part? And speaking of additional comments, so again, we got a slew of comments which we included in your packet. They came in the form of red lines from Verizon and AT&T. They came in late before the packet, but staff did spend time going through them. We included them in some of our presentation before the Land Use and Planning Board, but obviously it wasn't in a written form in front of them because of the timing. But staff did take time to consider these additional comments from Verizon and AT&T, and we do think some should be incorporated. And so I'm going to just talk about those, and you'll see them in your packet in the yellow highlighting. So some of them are related to height, replacement pole heights, and that was allowing, there's something, when you install something on a utility pole, you have to keep the communications equipment clear from the electrical equipment. And so it's called clearance, and we added some height in to accommodate the clearances that the telecommunications companies told us they have on PSE poles. We made just some clarifications to language, and then we also included a modest increase in the bulk limits, because what we're hearing, which is an unfortunate trend from the carriers, is that their equipment is getting bigger. And so one challenge we have as a regulator is the federal law requires that whatever design standards we impose be reasonable, which means the courts have interpreted to mean technically feasible. So that means if we are hearing across the board that radio cabinets need to be 15 cubic feet, and we would really love them to be 12, and that's what our first ordinance said, I think we run the risk of running afoul of federal law saying, no, you have to keep them at 12, when that's not what the technology is that's available. And so that's why we're recommending these increases in bulk limits. And then we also added some design standards for replacement utility poles and some clarifications on non-city light poles. And you'll see in the code provision we just discussed, we made it really explicit you need the property owner permission on this exception for schools and public parks. And so just to conclude my portion of the presentation, I just wanted to highlight there were a lot of comments received that staff is not recommending, and I just wanted to point those out, that some carriers asked that they could deploy on traffic control systems. That's a current prohibition. We discussed that, I think, a lot in our first round in 2019. So staff is not recommending making a change to that. We saw comments about removing clutter limits, and staff is not recommending that either, or limiting protections for views. So we want to keep those, we call them the clutter clauses, or the clauses that really address the visual impacts as much as we can. So we're not recommending any changes. We did not incorporate those changes. So with that, I think I'll hand it over to Erin. Oh, not yet.
All right, Councilmember Larmer, do you still have?
Oh, no, sorry, that was right.
All right, Councilmember Boyce, followed by Councilmember Michaud.
Thank you, Madam President. Christina, who's going to monitor these? Once we open the gate up and they start putting them in, how do we monitor, or do we monitor these at all to make sure they are staying within the guidelines and standards?
So a couple of ways. So of course we have just the permit review, right, when they come in for permit review. And then we also have provisions in our franchise and master license agreements that we can do kind of spot checks, or sometimes we ask for as-builts. And so we check to see that they installed what they said they were going to install, that they're keeping up the maintenance. And so we have provisions actually in the agreements, the authorizations, they have to be in the right of way.
And then I think Councilmember Michaud mentioned something about the school, but I guess I'm less concerned about the school now because they have to get separate entity, right? So they got to get permission from the school in order to put them on the school property. We have no say-so on that one way or another, correct?
We would have say-so on if it had a design standard attached, but not just saying yes or no. Can you have it on the school? That is the school's decision.
See, you lost me. Say that one more time.
So the city does have some control over of the design.
Right.
But whether or not, yes, it can be on the school or not.
That's up to the school.
It's up to the school.
Okay. All right. Thank you.
Thank you, Council President. This goes back to the beginning of your presentation about the strand mounted things. So you mentioned that they're allowed in some other cities. Like what cities?
Most all cities, actually.
Okay.
So Federal Way, Renton, all the cities in the South Zone we looked at, it's a common design.
Cities like Bellevue and Mercer Island?
Yes.
Okay.
Yes.
Councilmember Larmer.
Thank you. I want to go back to the what Councilmember Michaud brought up, the question about there's a gap in our design standards on buildings. Can you address that? So is that something we need to be addressing? Is if I was going to say, so if they come forward and they say they want to put this on a building.
Yes. So while you were talking about the last couple of questions, I was looking in our code a little bit. So in our zoning code, we have some additional standards, and this is an incredibly complex topic, so I apologize ahead of time. But part of what we're trying to do is separate out what's in right-of-way and what's outside right-of-way, and to make sure that the stuff that's in right-of-way, that those facilities are getting reviewed as utilities via utility permits. They're getting reviewed by development engineering staff in ECD, subject to all of the standards in Title VI that Christina was talking about. There are design standards and a number of other limitations. Outside of right-of-way, now we're into the zoning code territory, and we do have some different standards. But part of the issue is that those standards were written originally in 1998, and they were written with larger facilities in mind and not so much small cells. So we are trying to retrofit those a little bit to make them work. So to answer your question, if the council was to vote to allow them on school properties, public schools as written, then if a carrier proposed to attach some antennas to a school building, and say the school district allowed that, agreed to it, then they would be subject to the zoning code requirements for process, first of all, and that would be a minor conditional use permit. So that comes into ECD. A planner would review it for compliance with some criteria that relate to compatibility with surroundings, limiting impacts to surroundings, and then there's also some standards in zoning code that apply to all wireless facilities outside of the right-of-way that do relate to aesthetics. They're kind of broadly written, but they do ensure that antennas that are mounted on buildings are placed and designed in a way to limit aesthetic impacts. So there is a judgment call by the planner who's reviewing it, but that's one thing that they're checking for. Also, painting neutral colors, things like that is also required. Okay. So there is a little bit of design standard in there. It's just not written specific to small cells.
Okay, great. Thank you.
Sure. Are you done anyway? Okay. Okay. So we're going to go ahead and proceed to the Title 15 portion of this. So already kind of touched on it, but Title 15 is regulating everything outside of right-of-way. And again, it was written with that kind of facility in mind that you're seeing in the picture. So this is kind of somewhat the past of wireless facilities. They are still building these, but those are taller, they're bigger, they're more impactful, and they're meant to carry a signal a further distance. So as technology has been changing, we've been trying to keep up with it, and that's why we've been back to you a couple times here. But within Title 15, we set forth some process requirements for what kind of permits are required. And we also require some landscaping, we require fencing, We're trying to screen these as best we can. Of course, you're never going to screen a pole like this, but you're going to lessen the impact of the ground equipment. But the important thing to point out about anything that's reviewed under Title 15 requires a land use permit. So each one of those permits, whether it's, there's two types, whether it's a minor conditional use permit or another one that's called an admin approval. Those are two categories of permits, but they both require staff to review for criteria, write up a staff report that then I as manager review and edit, and we have the ability to apply conditions. But that takes time. They average around 3 to 4 weeks. So when small cells became common, or at least a new technology that we were aware of, and we were aware that carriers were intending to apply for allowing those in lots of locations, we were concerned about streamlining. So that's why we initially came back to you in 2018 to write some of the standards in Title VI about small cells. And so in order to keep that separation between the right-of-way and outside of right-of-way, we exempted small cells in right-of-way from land use permits with that goal in mind, trying to streamline the process to ensure that we're not having to spend 3 to 4 weeks per pole on something that's going to come in with hundreds of poles for multiple carriers. So that was already passed by the council several years ago. And the reasoning for that is not just the streamlining, the timing, but also small cells, when they're attached to power poles or streetlights, our reasoning is they're like a utility. They look and function like a utility, and you don't see telephone poles coming through and getting land use permits. So the one issue we didn't foresee at that time was the desire for the carriers to propose non-small cells within the right-of-way. So we did have a couple permits come in 2019 and 2020 to replace some power poles with taller poles. And by replace, I mean that when they approach PSC, for example, on a power pole and say we'd like to put some antennas on this, PSC has to consider the placement of the equipment in relation to some spacing standards from their power lines, and also the weight capacity of the pole. And so in most cases, the pole has to be replaced with a different pole that's capable of holding that, and that a lot of times is taller to meet those separation distances. So a couple of those came in, and they were tall, like 90 feet, with non-small cell equipment, meaning they're not necessarily tight to the pole, they're not concealed, and they don't meet that definition of small cell. And we had a provision in the zoning code that said that a wireless facility could be proposed on property that is owned or otherwise controlled by the government or a government agency. So under that wording, we had to allow it. So we did, you've probably seen a couple driving around the city. So now we're here in front of you tonight to address that issue. So we have proposed to add a definition of the term replacement utility pole, and that will account for these situations. So you see on the picture here an example of one that did unfortunately get built, and you can see the height difference. That's a pretty drastic example. It started with a approximately 34-foot pole that then got replaced with a 90-foot tower, essentially, that is another replacement utility pole. So we're trying to prevent that from happening, just from a height standpoint, because as you drive down the road, you look at the poles after that, and they're back to the short poles again, so it kind of stands out. So along these lines, we also excluded the term replacement utility pole from all the tower definitions, just to draw lines of what is what. And we had updated the small cell definition, as Christina explained, to match federal law. We added a replacement utility pole exemption to, as I explained before, regulate anything that's in the right-of-way as a utility. So by exempting it from the zoning code, it means it's reviewed by engineering, and it's reviewed for compliance with Title VI and with all of the requirements in Title VI, rather than going through the land use process. And lastly, we wanted to clarify that reference to government property that I talked about, to mention that, or to clarify that that excludes right-of-way, so that we're kind of closing that loophole.
Erin, just a quick question. Councilmember Kaur?
Yeah, my question was actually about the parks. Are we looking at some sort of design, something for the parks, public parks? I mean, if we approve that, then we probably have to look at that. Or is that just application per pole consideration. I mean, we should probably have design standards, I feel like.
Yeah, so the design standards that Christina mentioned earlier do apply in the situation of small cells. Because again, we're talking about small cells, we're not allowing the bigger things. A small cell is, if it's attached to a light pole, then it is subject to our design standards. If it's not attached to a light pole, it would be subject to the broader aesthetic standards I talked about earlier, and would be reviewed by planning through a minor conditional use permit to ensure that it's not having great aesthetic impacts.
How would we decide that? I mean, is that going to be like park by park? Like it's going to be different in Morrill Meadows versus...
I will tell you that the Parks Department will definitely have their own opinions.
Okay.
We have a good relationship with Parks, and we would, if one of these came in, you know, they would first have to approach Parks. We're not even going to accept a permit until they talk to Parks and get their approval to locate in the park. And if they get Parks approval, then we'll talk together with Parks Department about the specifics of the design. And there will be comments from Parks and comments from ECD to come up with something that we can all agree with.
Thank you.
Mm-hmm. Okay, any more questions before I move on? Just a couple more slides. Okay, so continuing on the discussion of replacement utility poles. Now this is technically not in Title 15, it's actually in Title 6, but because we're talking about utility poles here, I wanted to point it out. So in the ordinance before you, we are proposing a height maximum to limit them to 20 feet taller than adjacent poles. And again, going back to this example, that's important to make sure that they couldn't go from 34 feet to 90 feet when the adjacent poles are 34 feet. So it's about limiting that, that sort of standout factor. We're also proposing that they must be similar shape, color, and material to the pole that's being replaced. So the example I'm showing in the photo here is important, and actually thank you, Councilmember Fincher, for providing this example. This is located in Auburn. And this is what's called a glulam pole, which is a different type of wood pole that is rectangular, and they're wider than the round poles. And they are wooden, but they're glued together essentially with a bunch of thin pieces of wood, rather than having to have a tree that is as tall as that pole. They're a different method of construction. But they are bulkier, as you can see here. So with that in mind, if assuming that this pole before was not already a rectangular glulam pole, which is usually the case, so usually the older spherical poles, then the carrier would not be able to replace the round pole with a rectangular glulam pole because it's a different material and it's a different dimensions. Additionally, ADA standards need to be met to ensure sidewalk clearance. So again, in this example, if you look down at the bottom, this pole is actually blocking the sidewalk. That's a problem. So we would not allow that. We would need to ensure that there's passage so people can walk and get by on foot or on wheelchair. So we do have standards in place for that. And then also we have concealment measures that would apply. The equipment antennas would have to be flush mounted, so they're not going to stick out too far. They'd have to be painted a neutral color to match the pole, cannot be illuminated, and they need to conceal the wires in neutral colored conduit matching the pole. And then lastly, just to kind of circle back, so what is still regulated in Title 15? Because it gets a little confusing. Again, it is basically everything outside of right-of-way. So we have the two types. We have towers, which are things that are not small cells. They're bigger. They're referred to the first example I showed you that have the big fence compound. Those are still regulated by zoning code. And the only difference is they have a different height limitation depending on their zoning district. So if they're in industrial or commercial, they are limited to 90 feet height for one user and 120 feet height for two users. If they're ag or multifamily zones, they're limited to the max zoning district height, and that is significantly different. So that's the max building height. So we don't want them taller than the buildings. So it's 30 to 40 feet average. And then small cells, all of them that are outside of the right-of-way are still regulated by zoning code. And that's important because it means they go through a permit, a land use permit. So I've put those two different types of permits up there, the minor conditional use and the administrative approval. Really the only difference between those is the minor conditional use involves public notice. So we do a notice of application that goes in the newspaper and gets posted on site. So we used to require a full conditional use permit, which involved a public hearing, but we found that that was really overkill for wireless facilities. Nobody showed up and nobody cared. It's kind of a waste of resources and time. So last year, council approved a collection of process streamlining changes that changed some things from a CUP to a minor CUP, just to eliminate that hearing step. So breaking down the categories there within small cells, they're all non-right-of-way. If they're government property, like we talked about, or if they're in residential zones, it's a minor conditional use permit. And the residential zones, as Christina already explained, as proposed, would be just on public schools or public parks with a 30-foot setback if council chooses to adopt that. And if it's non-residential, it's just an admin approval. But everything that's a small cell is subject to Title 15 or Title 6 for design standards. So very complicated. We threw a lot of info at you. Any more questions?
All right. Anyone else have any more questions? Councilmember Michaud.
Thank you, Council President. Okay, so are we allowed to deny a permit because we don't like the way something looks, even if it's not in our code? It's just something that we have in our head that we want this park to look this way.
I think, Christina, I need your help on this one, but I think in public parks, as a property owner, we have quite a bit of allowance to deny. If we're not the property owner, we do not. I think we have codes we have to review for. If we find it's not compliant with the code, if it's outside right of way and we're going through the land use process, we will place it on hold and send a correction letter to the applicant saying, here are the things you're not meeting, please revise and resubmit. And if they've refused to resubmit, then I guess at that point we could deny a permit. Does that make sense? Agreed. Okay.
Okay, thank you.
All right. Any other questions or comments? Councilmember Fincher.
Thank you. Just thinking of gaps. Are we covered already for cemeteries? As far as
yes. Well, let me think through this. Okay. Anything in residential that's outside of right-of-way is prohibited as we're proposing it. So I think in the everything I can think of, a cemetery is going to be in a residential district such as SR1. So yes, that would be prohibited. The only exception would be if we have an odd cemetery that's not in a residential zone. If we have one in a commercial zone, then they could build something subject to the Chapter 6 standards.
Thank you.
I had a comment on the parks question. So one other thing to add to Aaron's answer is any wireless facilities on park as our property would come under a lease. And so the city would govern those. The terms of the lease would also come into play. And so most leases do come to council as well. So you'd be able to look at the terms of the lease. And that is a way that you could control design standards more as a property owner.
Great, thank you. All right, so I don't see any other hands raised. So before you have an ordinance to amend these city codes about the wireless facilities. Derek, I'm going to look to you for a second for a head nod, but are we going to move this forward to the calendar for consent on August 17th? Okay, and that's just to allow any of the carriers to come and make public comment. So instead of moving it to our next council meeting where we're trying to get out to enjoy National Night Out. So is everyone okay moving that forward to the consent calendar on the 17th? All right, wonderful. Thank you very much. Okay, next up is information only, and it's the 2021-22 property insurance renewal.
Am I moving this forward, Kim? Okay. It's been 18 months since I've been in front of you, so pardon me. Council President, council members, Mayor Ralph, great to be in front of you. I'm going to speak today about the property insurance renewal, which occurred on July 1st. The premium increase was 14% this year. I had been getting indications that premium increase was going to be about 25%. So really pleased with how that played out. There was an additional 3%, so really the total is 17%, but 3% was accounted for by the increase in the value of city properties, which if you saw the headline today, it was actually a lot more than that. But our property insurance uses replacement value, so that in the event that one of our properties does sustain a fire or something like that, we actually get to replace that building with like, kind, and quality, which would include a lot of improvements. And in the recent loss we had, for instance, up at the Lake Meridian restroom, we got essentially a brand new building out of that. The market, though, really continues to deteriorate. The wildfires last year, the storms in Texas that occurred in the winter, and then, of course, we're looking at, you've all heard in the news, of course, the fire season that we're looking at, knock on wood that it hasn't affected the air quality here yet, but nationwide it will have undoubtedly an effect on the insurance market. And our primary carrier did reduce their limits, as you'll see in and this chart is a little bit small, and it actually is very similar to this same chart that I've provided in years past. Lexington reduced their overall limits to $10 million, where they had been up as high as $25 million in the past. However, they're at 10 million all the way across, and then the next 15 million for a total of 25 covers earthquake and flood, all of our property. And then we have another carrier on top of that for the $150 million in total coverage. We have above 25 million. That 150 million we insure to in the event we would have some kind of catastrophic loss here in Kent, and Showware Center really is the driver of that particular amount. The earthquake and flood is really an improvement, though, over the prior year carrier, because it's the same carriers are covering both earthquake and flood as well as all of our property, rather than having a separate policy for earthquake and flood. So that is a good thing. So in addition to talking about property, and as I had conversations with our broker about the state of the markets as of July 1, I spent some time talking with them about our liability renewal, which is going to occur on January 1, and as well talking about our cyber renewal. And so a few thoughts about that. We're 6 months away, but the market really continues to be in a state of deterioration. Many carriers are continuing to pull out. Those nuclear jury verdicts that I've shared with you that we've seen continue to affect the market and how insurers see municipalities, corporations. The worst I've heard recently is the $1.2 billion settlement that USC made as a result of years' worth of sexual harassment and molestation that was occurring at the University of Southern California. $1.2 billion, they're actually having to sell off property to cover that. You can't get $1.2 billion worth of insurance. So, and those kinds of numbers continue to affect the markets overall on liability, social inflation, and honestly, the city's loss development has not been great over the past year, as I've shared with you in some of the conversations that we've had. In terms of next steps, I'm working with our actuary to come up with what the reserves are, and also with our partners in finance to come up with what reserves we're going to need for next year. We're looking at undoubtedly an increase in our retention or the deductible that we'll have on our liability program. And in advance of the policy we'll purchase, we won't really know about that until likely December. The actuary will be planning a couple of different levels of deductibles so that with finance, we can ensure that we'll have enough reserves set aside for those. I'm also working with our broker already. This is the earliest we've started in putting together the information for our January 1 renewal. Typically, that starts in about September. We're trying to get ahead of that. I did share with our broker and was really happy to share the 4 YouTube videos that the mayor and Chief Padilla did, documenting what the city of Kent is doing to really comply with legislative changes in policing that have happened. Our broker's really excited. Those likely will be shared with our underwriter, again, to demonstrate how much we're doing to get ahead of that sort of thing. I've talked with the chief and may ask him to participate in an interview with some of those underwriters so that they get a better feel for what the city is about, particularly on the very important issue of policing. On the cyber side, ransomware, we've all heard about how damaging it is. I can tell you the city of Portland, who had never had a loss, their July 1 renewal, their ransomware coverage almost has gone away, and they had a lot more than we have. And the retentions that their cyber policy went up substantially. There are other vulnerabilities that insurers are concerned about. I do want to share a really good piece of news, though. I want to give a shout out to James Endicott and Joe Bennett and the staff in IT who deal with IT network security. They have been working with our current insurer about some of the steps they're taking. Corvus is very happy with the work they've been doing, and that's going to be very helpful for us as we look at our January 1 renewal, even though the broker tells me that right now sort of affinity to one insurer is really not a good thing, because they're all trying to cut back on some of how many insureds they have because of the risk that cyber presents at this time. So any questions about anything that I've shared today?
Councilmember Boyce, how did I know you were going to ask a question?
Just real quick, Chris, is it possible with all the renewals, or maybe you can show a graph, maybe 3 to 5 years historically? I know you say 17%, but it'd be nice to just kind of see a pattern of the increases over 3 to 5 years. Is it possible?
Yeah, the numbers were in the memo that is in the packet.
Previous years?
Yes.
Okay.
Yeah,
right. So I need to read it then. Okay.
5 years worth of prior premiums in the memo.
Okay. Then I need to read it. Thank you.
No worries.
And I will.
No worries.
All right. Any other questions or comments? All right. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Moving on, we have the 2021 second quarter fee in lieu funds. And this also requires action from council.
Terry Jungman, Park Planning and Development Manager. Madam President, Mayor, Council members, nice to see you all again, twice in 2 weeks. So I'm here tonight to present the 2021 second quarter fee in lieu. We've moved this to a quarterly allocation to just kind of compile these through the course of the year as opposed to bringing them individually. Just a little bit of efficiency achieved there. So between April 1st, 2021 and June 30th, 2021, we received a total of $10,200 from one developer. It was a subdivision into 2 lots located at 11615 Southeast 259th Place. They paid fee in lieu of dedicating parkland to mitigate the development of homes in a local subdivision. We'll hold these in a reserve account for capital improvements. The site that we've selected for the capital improvements is Campus Park because of an upcoming project that we have located there, so that we can move these funds forward into implementation quicker. So that would be the allocation, and we're recommending to accept these in the next council year. Any questions?
All right. Any questions about this? All right. Everyone okay accepting these funds? All right. Very easy. Thank you.
Thanks a lot.
All right. Next, we have allocation recommendations. It's the third round of Community Development Block Grant Coronavirus Funds.
Good afternoon, Madam President. I'm here before you as a follow-up to earlier in the year. You asked me to come back to you and present the Community Development Block Grant Coronavirus allocations for the third round. As you remember, we had 2 rounds of allocations. The full grant was $1,530,261. And for this third round, it was $857, excuse me. Yeah, no, that's right. I can't read my own writing. $859,720. Just as a reminder, we did have a very short application process for this round as well. It was shorter than the first round, even because we really didn't want to be overly burdensome with our organizations. And for organizations that received funds in the first and the third round, we didn't ask them to apply to make that easier for them. We just evaluated whether we should give them additional funding. We had, let's see, 15 applications. We funded 10 out of 15, so that's quite a bit this time. And the memo that you have, the highlighted organizations are the newer organizations we funded, and the non-highlighted ones are the ones that received funds in both rounds. So we were very conscious that you wanted to give rental assistance. One thing that we did is we reduced the number of organizations that we provided rental assistance for, but we gave additional rental assistance. We wanted to reduce it because it takes a lot of paperwork to comply with these grants. There's a lot of federal oversight for the coronavirus funds, and we really wanted to push those grants out to some of the smaller organizations last round because we wanted to spread the money widely in the community. But some of them were challenged in doing all the paperwork, to be frank, and so we decided to reduce the number of those organizations we funded. One thing we were very happy and proud that we did this time was there's a smaller organization that some of you probably are familiar with called Utopia, and they do really good work in our community. And they applied, and we did some follow-up with them and thought that they sort of had the capacity to do this grant, to allocate this grant, but found out that maybe they needed a little bit of support, so we reached out to Multi-Service Center, and they are a long-term organization we funded for many years, and said, would you work with Utopia? And we were so delighted that they had already started working with smaller organizations. They really received quite a bit of coronavirus funds for rental assistance and just rental assistance funds and CARES Act funds. And they had reached out already to smaller organizations in our community to say, we want to make sure your community gets this rental assistance. So we will help, we will designate some of our monies for this. And so they were all too happy to work with Utopia. So we provided a grant of $102,000, and part of that is for Utopia to do the outreach to get the clients and also for their personnel. And Multi-Service Center, we thought they would take some of the money for their own clients, but they said, no, we want to give all this money to Utopia's clients. So it was really, really great. And so we see this as something we can do in the future when we have challenges with some of our organizations that may not have the capacity. We can help build these relationships, and they can both learn from each other. So that's what we're here before you to present our allocations for the third round. Do you have any questions about any of the organizations we funded? We put the demographics in here. We did this for our Human Services Commission, and they really liked us a lot. They really liked, you know, as Andrea was there, they liked the fact that they could see who we were giving the money to, so they could see we tried to be as comprehensive as possible.
Great. Councilmember Kaur, followed by Councilmember Larmer.
Thank you, Dinah, for all the work you put into this. My question is about the to be determined to.
Yes, yes. We did not receive any applications from Hispanic or Latino serving organizations.
And what about the last one? That's
the last one?
To be determined. There's two.
Oh, right. One was the set aside for the ethnic-based community. The other one was rent assistance in case we have an emergency. We might end up giving that money to the Multi-Service Center Utopia, but we wanted to just leave a little bit of that as a set aside.
Okay.
Yeah.
I enjoyed looking at the diversity of communities being served by these organizations, so I really appreciate you including that, so thank you.
You're welcome.
Thank you. Yeah, wonderful work. I'm very excited to see the yellow and see the new organizations that were funded, but I want to especially applaud you for the creative thinking around the partnership between Utopia and Multi-Service Center. I think that's a fabulous solution, and I just really appreciate you guys being creative about making that work and hopefully doing that more in the future, too. Great job.
Councilmember Fincher.
Thank you very much. And I just wanted to jump on the bandwagon. Thank you very much. I like seeing not only who we're serving, but how we're serving them. So I like that column also. And I noticed a couple of companies here that I didn't realize. I know that they serve Kent, but I didn't realize we're actually in Kent. So good to know. Yeah. Thank you.
Councilmember Michaud.
Thank you, Council President. Dinah, I say this, and you guys aren't always here, but I'm really proud of the work that we're doing. And we really appreciate that you're thinking about diversity and equity. So thank you.
Thank you. Councilmember Michaud is she's a real support to us. We really appreciate all the work she does with our Human Services Commission. She's been really terrific.
Well said, Councilmember Michaud. Just a couple questions. In the rounds 1 and 2, when the funds were distributed, are those agencies supposed to report back to us?
We do have outcomes, and if you'd like us to bring those to you, we could do that. Yes,
that would be great.
Bring you back a comprehensive overview of how the organizations do.
That would be wonderful. And then, do they have to submit receipts to get reimbursed, or?
Yes.
Okay.
That's definitely, because we get monitored by HUD quite a lot.
And did we have anyone that didn't use up all their money? Do we have anything left over that we're able to redistribute, or did everyone spend it all?
Yeah, we do have a little bit from the first round that we will redistribute, but I hope these organizations will spend the money.
Well, you're doing good work. Thank you very much. Councilmember Fincher, do you have anything additional?
I do. That brings to mind another couple of questions. So if there are agencies that are not getting their reports into you, what is the process then?
Yes. Our approach is we want organizations to succeed because they work on behalf of us for our residents. And they're like, an arm and an extension of us. And so we work with them. We provide technical assistance. We meet with them. We try to get them up to speed. Very rarely have we defunded an organization. Believe me, if we've done that, it's because we've tried so hard to get them in compliance. And at some point, it gets to be a losing proposition, and we get concerned about compliance with HUD. But we do provide technical assistance and work with organizations, and we want them to grow and develop their capacity, like Utopia is doing, for example, because we're getting larger, we're getting more diverse, and so we want organizations to be able to help our residents.
I appreciate that, because an organization that might have 13 or 30 people may not have all the know-how, the wherewithal, the capacity, as you said earlier, to be able to have that knowledge that is needed, especially with government grants and support. But yet, they still need to be good stewards of public funds. So I appreciate that you're offering the assistance and keeping tabs on that. So thank you.
Wonderful. So is everyone okay moving this forward to consent? All right. Great. Thank you very much.
Okay. Thank you.
And then last on the agenda, we have the Advanced Kent 2021-22 Strategy Development and Performance Measures.
Good evening, Madam President, Mayor, Council members. I'm Michael Mage. I'm here to give an update on our performance measures program. And just as a quick recap, this falls under the Advanced Kent program, which has a few different areas, including our Innovate Academy, where we train city employees in lean methods, tools, and mindset. We also have our strategy deployment, which we work with ELT to prioritize city goals and deploy resources to achieve them. That ties into our performance measures, which we then want to evaluate city metrics and publish those on a public-facing dashboard to show that our goals are being attained. and always working towards continuous improvement in support of major improvements throughout the city and in specific departments. So looking at performance measures just by way of sharing information. So this is the process of collecting, analyzing, and reporting data regarding performance of the organization as a whole. It helps local government to evaluate the quality and effectiveness of government services. So we really look at a few different measures, including inputs, which would include things like the resources needed, outputs, which would be program activities, or efficiency measures, which would be the ratio of inputs and outputs. And then, of course, we want to always be looking at outcomes. What are the actual results of the programs and services we provide? You may recall this diagram that I shared with you in my last update from November, really looking to tie, bring the council goals to life by tying them to operational activities and aligning them with our strategic plan. So currently, we have gathered and sorted around 394 total ideas, trying to distill them down into the metric level, something that is actually measurable. Through that process, we've identified 14 common themes across all departments and are still working on refining those moving forward. And we're at about 100 potential metrics, looking to reduce that number down, ideally to something that is manageable and easily digestible. So we're looking at a minimum of 25 metrics, including targets that would be evenly distributed to those council goals that are on the desktop display of this computer, in fact. And we'll be using our SMART criteria, again, that's specific, measurable, achievable, and relevant and time-bound criteria for creating these citywide objectives. Each department will be connecting one or more to one or more of the objectives with a performance metric. And we're in that process of refining these metrics down with ELT. So I wanted to just share with you some of our conversation with ELT and sort of how we're looking at approaching this question of performance. And we got a little creative in the days of having to do virtual meetings, and so we did a live poll with ELT. This gives you a little bit of some of the conversation that we've had. And really, it underscores the importance of connecting performance with our existing work. We have a lot of workload indicators, but we know that they don't necessarily tell the full story, so we're looking for the ones that really will resonate both internally and with our public. Also, professional associations are now moving to require performance metrics, no longer workload indicators. So we are finding ourselves in a period of transitioning to those quality measures moving forward in this performance measure effort. So this helps to tell our story. It keeps us accountable. It requires a lot of discussion and a lot of spreadsheets. So there's some responses to our recent poll that you see there, a word cloud relating to what value does a performance dashboard provide. We did a ranking of some of the outcomes that we're looking at and ranked the common themes that we have been surfacing. And as I mentioned, we're looking at refining those moving forward. So from a project standpoint, where are we at with this? So we have broken this project into 4 phases. We have completed the first phase, which is really just catching us up on our current state with performance and our current metrics. And now we are in phase 2, which is really asking the question, where do we want to go? How will we achieve the current council goals? And so we have a series of decision gates, as I call them, to help us refine down to the vital few metrics, starting with basic questions around what data is currently available, how do we use it to inform citywide performance, and then ultimately, what are those vital few metrics, those key performance metrics, if you will, that will show our progress as a city. So as we move forward into phase 3, which we anticipate in the fall, we will then begin a deep dive into the data collection process, which will be a bit of an effort. But before we get to that phase, you will see me again, and I will be sharing with you what are those actual list of final metrics that we've refined down with ELT. So that's sort of where we're going. And finally, in the phase 4, we would want to publish this on a performance dashboard that would be accessible by the public and really show how we're linking our organizational inputs, outputs, and outcomes. At a conceptual level, I just want to share with you this idea of how we're having to shift our thinking about what we measure. I mentioned that we have a lot of workload indicators, and this has led to some discussion on how we actually begin to move towards quality measures. And when we're looking at something like a workload indicator, we're often measuring things like effort versus quantity. And we also know that we want to move towards measures that express effect and quality, really asking the question, is anyone better off for providing these services? And to do that, we really, at a much a phase in the future, we know we will need to begin collecting resident feedback. And one of the comments that came up in one of our ELT discussions is really around how do we kind of get comments from residents, how do we engage residents and continue to provide feedback through surveys. So this is where we're looking at the possibility of a performance survey in the future to connect outcomes to what we are producing as an organization as outputs. And then underscoring the need that we would need to continue these surveys on a regular basis to have a horizontal view over time of our progress. So let's talk about the dashboard. We've done a review of many peer dashboards, both locally and nationally, and we've done a lot of learning about what we think works well and what we think will work well for us. And we've looked at everyone, including our friends in Renton, and there's one particular dashboard that stands out to us that we have been looking at and gaining a lot of inspiration from, and this is the dashboard from the city of Williamsburg. I will share with you that many of the actual topic areas or themes, as we're calling them, are fairly similar across multiple municipalities. But what we like is just the level of accessibility in this particular dashboard, and it has allowed us to imagine how we might connect and bring all of these ideas together. So this is a bit of a diagram of sort of pulling the thread together, if you will, and you can see on the far right-hand side that ranking of the common themes, many of those themes which will probably be familiar to you, and that's really that center point of those themes which will become citywide objectives using the metrics that we are identifying. That's where we hope to pull everything together. So what does that actually look like? That's the hard part, right? So actually putting it all together, here's a sample for you. It's just a sample. We're still kind of figuring out what the metrics would be, but as an example for a common theme like public safety, we would identify a range of metrics that meet a theme like that. We would develop a narrative explanation around that. It's important to tell your story using the numbers, but also actually using narrative. And the key parts that seem very common throughout other municipalities include answering the question around why this matters for this particular area, what we're doing about it, and then that outcome layer, which is how satisfied are residents. So the idea behind the individual performance metrics, if this were on a website, you'd be able to click down into the metric level and actually see a readout of all of those metrics over time. Including the links to council goals at the bottom. And then we like the idea of also including related projects and programs to any of the given themes. I think it helps to tell the story and just sometimes the numbers, you look at the numbers and you're like, well, what does that mean? And sometimes you need the projects and the programs to help a little bit tell that story, especially to the public. So just want to give a quick shout out to our project contributors. I come around and ask for data from all the different departments, but I am not the data expert. I often need people to sit down with me and tell me what I'm looking at and how we can make it work for the city. And so I just want to recognize all of those contributors. Our A-team has been meeting throughout COVID to help be the contact folks for this project. And they have been really going the extra mile to help this project come through. They are the ones that have helped us sort through these ideas and refine down and make our metrics a bit more digestible and manageable at the leadership level. And we also have a number of subject matter experts who provide data collection, analysis, and review. And it often takes a coalition of the willing to build a citywide performance system. So just wanted to acknowledge those contributors. So in the remainder of this year, we are hoping to refine very shortly here our list with ELT and then bring that back to you all for review, as I mentioned. So you can see what metrics we're proposing for the citywide dashboard and give us feedback. And then there is some process level considerations. How do we actually collect this data? That's actually a big lift. How do we collect this data? How do we display this data? Our friends in IT, probably many meetings with them as well. So in the next year, that's when we would want to launch this dashboard and begin the regular process of updating and monitoring. And that is, a piece that is going to take some practice for us as well to begin that regular cadence of reviewing these metrics, seeing if they're working for us, and refining as we go along. And at that point, we would move into looking at the outcome level, beginning to collect that resident feedback to know that we are in alignment with our residents and customers, I should say. And continuing to build internal support and expertise for data analysis at the city. That is another culture shift piece that is also critical to mention for this project. So I thank you and am willing to take any questions you may have.
Thank you. Councilmember Larmer.
Thank you. Great presentation. I'm a huge fan of, knowing what's the saying, you can't manage what you can't measure. So anything you can measure is valuable. Question on the dashboard tool itself.
Sure.
Is this, are you thinking this would be a third-party application that we'd purchase, or is this something that would be consumed within our website redesign that's happening right now?
Great question. I would say to be determined. Right now, we're trying to just, in a PowerPoint, visualize what we think would work best. And then I would leave it to the technical experts to help us determine what is the best way of implementing this. I will just share that other cities, sometimes they start with just a PDF. And so that, in my mind, is okay. We're still publishing it. It's still a consumable method. Can we do more? That would be my question. But it also relates back to staff capacity and our technical ability. So great question, still to be determined. Lots of options on the table.
Okay, fair enough. Thank you for the work.
Great. Any other questions or comments? Thank you. Great presentation. I really like the example. It kind of shows what you're collecting and what you're going to do with it, and then how we will all be able to take a look at that and share with the community as well. So
appreciate it.
Well done. Thank you.
Thank you.
All right, that brings us to the very end of our agenda today. Thank you everyone for being here. Have a good evening, and we are adjourned.